Miguel Santos had always been an early riser. The city still slept when he walked through the quiet streets, pushing his old bicycle beside him. His shoes were worn, his jacket a little too thin for the cold mornings, but he didn't complain. He had long ago learned that peace lived in the small things, in the sound of birds waking up, in the smell of the city before it got noisy, in the feeling that the day was new and waiting. Every morning, Miguel arrived at Crescent Heights Academy before the first student or teacher showed up. The building was large, full of glass and marble, far too grand for someone like him, but he treated it like his own home. He unlocked the doors, turned on the lights, and walked through the empty halls with his mop and bucket. To most people, he was just the janitor, invisible, forgettable. But to Miguel it was honest work, and that was enough. He moved with quiet rhythm as he cleaned, humming softly to himself. Sometimes it was an old song from his childhood, sometimes something he made up on the spot. Music had always lived inside him. Before life took a different turn, Miguel had once played in small cafes with his guitar. He wasn't famous, but people loved the way he sang, warm and full of feeling. Those were good times, before his wife fell sick and he had to sell everything to pay the hospital bills. After she passed, music left him too. Now his life was simple: work, home, and his teenage son, Mateo. They lived in a small apartment in the old part of town. The roof leaked when it rained, and the heater broke often, but it was theirs. Miguel made sure his son never went hungry, even if that meant skipping meals himself. Every day at the academy was the same, until one morning when something changed. It was still early, the sky gray, the halls quiet. As Miguel pushed his mop down the music wing, he heard soft piano notes. It surprised him. No one was supposed to be there that early. The sound was gentle and uncertain, like someone testing the keys for the first time. Curious, he peeked into the music room. There, sitting by the grand piano, was a little girl. Her dark hair fell over her shoulders, and her small hands moved carefully across the keys. Miguel had seen her before, always surrounded by bodyguards or expensive cars. She was the daughter of the school's owner, the powerful businessman, Mr. Randall Hayes. Everyone knew her name, Clara. She looked delicate like a porcelain doll, but there was something sad in her eyes. She didn't notice Miguel watching her at first. When she did, she froze, her hands stopping mid-note. "I'm sorry, miss," Miguel said quickly, lowering his head. "I didn't mean to interrupt." Clara just looked at him. She didn't say anything, not a word. After a few seconds, she turned her eyes back to the piano and pressed one soft note, like a whisper. Miguel felt awkward, unsure if he should leave. "You play beautifully," he said gently. "The piano sounds happy when you touch it." Still, she didn't reply. She simply stared at the keys. After a moment, she stood up, picked up her small bag, and walked out without a sound. That day stayed with Miguel. He didn't know why, but he couldn't stop thinking about that quiet little girl. There was something heavy in her silence. The next morning, he saw her again. Same time, same place. She sat at the piano before anyone else arrived. This time, Miguel didn't disturb her. He just worked quietly, humming as he cleaned near the door. The girl didn't look up, but when he started humming a tune that matched her playing, she paused for a second, almost listening. For the next few weeks, this small, silent meeting became part of his mornings. He would hum while mopping, and she would play softly. It was like an unspoken friendship built out of sounds instead of words. One afternoon, Miguel overheard two teachers talking in the hallway. "Such a shame about Clara," one said. "She hasn't spoken a word since the accident." "The accident?" the other asked. "Yes, 2 years ago. A car crash took her mother's life. Clara survived, but she hasn't talked since. The doctors say it's emotional trauma, not physical. Her father has tried everything: therapy, music lessons, specialists. Nothing helps." Miguel felt a deep ache in his chest. He knew loss too well. He knew what silence could do to a person. The next morning, he wrote a small note and left it on the piano bench before he began his work. The note said, "Music heals the heart before it heals the voice." He didn't sign it, but he hoped she would read it. When he came back later to clean, the note was gone. The following day, something new happened. Clara was waiting for him. When he entered the room, she didn't look away like before. Instead, she lifted a small notepad and showed him something she had written. "You hum nicely." Miguel smiled, his heart warm. He took out his small notebook, the one he used to write grocery lists, and wrote back, "You play better than I hum." From then on, they began communicating through notes. Short sentences, little jokes, sometimes just doodles. She would play a few notes and he would hum along, making her lips curl into the smallest, shyest smile. Miguel didn't know it then, but those quiet exchanges were the start of something that would change both of their lives. As days turned into weeks, he learned more about her without her ever speaking. She loved the piano but never played when her father was around. She liked drawing tiny birds on her notebook corners. And every time someone mentioned her mother, she stopped playing and stared into space. One day, as the winter wind howled outside, Clara didn't come to the music room. Miguel waited longer than usual, but she never appeared. He felt oddly lonely, as if something important was missing from his day. Later, as he cleaned the hallway near the executive office, he saw Mr. Hayes walking with his assistant. His voice was low but angry. "She needs to focus on her lessons," he said sharply. "No more distractions. No more wasting time with that janitor's nonsense." Miguel's stomach dropped. He realized Clara must have told her father about their small notes, or the mornings at the piano. He didn't mean any harm, but maybe her father misunderstood. The next few mornings, she was gone. The music room stayed silent, and Miguel's humming felt empty. One afternoon, after the last bell rang, he found something under the piano lid, a folded paper. Inside, written in Clara's neat handwriting, were 3 words, "I miss music." He smiled sadly. He wanted to help her, but what could a janitor do? Still, he couldn't ignore the message. That night, when he got home, he pulled out his old guitar. Dust covered the strings. It had been years since he played, but his fingers still remembered. As he strummed the soft chords, memories of his wife came rushing back. Her laughter, her voice, the way she said that music could mend broken souls. The next morning, Miguel came to school earlier than usual. He placed another small note on the piano. "Let's bring music back. Together." When Clara arrived, she saw the note and looked up at him. For the first time, she smiled openly. She sat at the piano and he took a seat nearby, tapping his hand on the mop handle like a drumstick. She began playing a slow tune, hesitant at first, then stronger. Miguel hummed along, low and soft. Something shifted in the air that day, a connection neither of them could explain. The room felt lighter, warmer, as if her mother's spirit had returned for a moment to listen. After that, she began meeting him not just in the mornings, but sometimes after school. They didn't talk, but they didn't need to. Their friendship was built out of music, out of trust, out of quiet understanding. Students started whispering about the janitor and the rich girl who played together after hours. Some teachers thought it was strange, but when they passed by the music room and heard the sweet harmony, even they couldn't help but stop and listen. Miguel didn't care what anyone said. For him, Clara wasn't just the executive's daughter. She was a lost soul trying to find her way back to the world. And maybe, through music, he could help her. What he didn't know was that his kindness was being noticed by more than just Clara. Someone else was watching, someone who would soon test everything he stood for. But for now, in that quiet room, under the soft glow of the morning sun, a janitor and a silent girl shared something no one else could understand. Hope, wrapped in melody. Days turned into weeks, and Miguel and Clara's quiet friendship grew stronger. The school was full of noise, students laughing, teachers shouting, bells ringing. But inside that music room, everything was still and peaceful. It had become their little world, where no one judged them and no one expected anything. Miguel looked forward to those moments every day. After sweeping classrooms and cleaning hallways, He would walk toward the music room with a small smile on his face. Sometimes he carried a sandwich or a warm pastry he bought on his way to work. He'd leave it on the piano for her without saying anything. By the time he came back to clean the next day, the food would be gone, and a little thank you note would be waiting for him. He noticed how Clara's music changed over time. At first, her playing had been quiet and uncertain, like she was afraid of being heard, but now her fingers moved with more confidence. The melodies sounded brighter, lighter, like sunlight slowly finding its way through clouds. One afternoon, as Miguel mopped the hallway outside, he heard her playing a song he recognized. It was one he used to sing to his son when he was small, a soft tune about courage and hope. He froze, his heart thudding. She must have remembered it from the times he hummed while working. When she finished, she looked toward the doorway and gave a tiny nod as if to say, "Did you hear that?" Miguel smiled and clapped softly. "Beautiful," he said. "That song suits you." She didn't speak, of course, but she smiled back. It was a real smile this time, not shy or polite, but full of warmth. Over the next few days, they began spending more time together after school. Clara would play the piano, and Miguel would sometimes bring his old guitar. They didn't perform like musicians do, they simply shared the space. It wasn't about perfection, it was about peace. He often wondered what went through her mind as she played. Sometimes she closed her eyes, swaying slightly, completely lost in the music. Other times she looked up at the ceiling, as if searching for something beyond it. He wanted to ask her about her mother, about the accident, about her silence, but he never did. He knew some pains were too deep to touch. Instead, he shared little stories from his own life, about his son Mateo, who was studying hard but wanted to quit school to work part-time, about his wife, who used to sing even when she was sick, about the dreams he once had, of opening a small cafe where music could live forever. Clara listened quietly, sometimes drawing little doodles while he spoke. He never knew if she understood everything, but he could tell she cared. One day, Miguel entered the music room and found her sitting on the floor crying silently. Her hands were clenched on her knees and her face was red. He hesitated, not wanting to scare her. Slowly, he knelt beside her and waited. After a moment, she pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket and handed it to him. It was a letter, full of crossed-out lines and shaky handwriting. It said, "Father says I should stop wasting time with music. He says it reminds him of her, but I can't stop. It's all I have left." Miguel's chest tightened. He took a slow breath and looked at her. "He misses her too," he said softly. "Sometimes when people hurt, they hide it behind anger." She wiped her eyes with her sleeve and shook her head. "I know," he said, "but you can't stop doing what keeps you alive inside." He picked up his guitar, strummed a few soft notes, and began humming the melody they had shared before. Clara watched him for a long moment, then slowly stood up and began playing along. The sadness in her face didn't disappear, but the tears stopped. That was the day Miguel realized that music wasn't just healing her. It was healing him too. As the weeks went by, word of their unlikely friendship began spreading through the school. Some students were curious, others whispered behind their backs. "Why would the CEO's daughter spend time with a janitor?" they said. Teachers frowned, but said nothing. After all, Clara had started smiling again, and that alone was a miracle. But not everyone was pleased. One morning, Miguel was sweeping near the courtyard when he overheard two members of the administrative staff talking. "Mr. Hayes found out she's been spending time with the janitor," one said. "He's furious." "He should be," the other replied. "It's not appropriate. He's just a worker here. And his daughter, she's fragile. He thinks the janitor is taking advantage of her emotions." Miguel felt his heart sink. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He just wanted to help her. But he knew how people saw him. Poor, uneducated, a nobody. That evening, as he was about to leave for home, the principal called him to the office. "Mr. Santos," the principal said carefully, "Mr. Hayes wants to speak with you tomorrow morning." Be on time? Miguel nodded quietly. That night he could barely sleep. His small apartment felt colder than usual. His son noticed his silence but didn't ask. He had learned long ago that his father spoke more through actions than words. The next morning, Miguel arrived early, his heart pounding. He cleaned his hands, straightened his shirt, and went to the executive office. Mr. Hayes was there, sitting behind a huge desk, his suit perfectly pressed, his eyes sharp and tired. "You're the janitor who's been spending time with my daughter," he said without greeting. "Yes, sir," Miguel answered quietly. "Clara and I often share music." "Music," the man repeated, his tone flat. "Do you realize she hasn't spoken a single word in 2 years, and you think humming songs in my school will fix that?" Miguel didn't respond right away. He could feel the anger in the man's voice, but also fear, the fear of a father who didn't know how to help his child. "I don't think I can fix her," Miguel said softly. "But I think music can. It gives her peace. I've seen it." Mr. Hayes stood up and walked to the window. "My daughter doesn't need peace. She needs discipline, focus, therapy. You have no idea what she's been through." "You're right," Miguel said. "I don't, but I know what silence feels like. I know what it's like to lose someone and not have the strength to speak about it." For a long moment there was silence between them. The only sound was the faint ticking of the office clock. Finally, Mr. Hayes turned around. "Stay away from her," he said coldly. "You have your job. Do it. Don't overstep." Miguel nodded slowly. "As you wish, sir." He left the office with heavy steps. That afternoon, he avoided the music room. He couldn't bear to see the piano without her there. But as he was leaving for the day, he found something taped to his locker, a small folded paper with a drawing of a guitar and a piano side by side. Underneath, in neat handwriting, were the words, "Don't stop the music." He stood there for a long time, reading those words again and again. Over the next few days, he kept his distance, afraid of getting Clara in more trouble. But one morning, while cleaning near the auditorium, he saw her sitting quietly in the back row, hugging her knees. She looked lost. When she saw him, she waved him over and handed him another note. It said, "They don't understand. Music makes me feel safe." Miguel read it slowly, then looked at her with gentle eyes. "Then we'll find a way," he whispered. He began thinking. What if he could help her in a way her father couldn't refuse? Maybe if others saw what music could do, they'd understand. That evening, as he walked home, an idea began to form in his mind. Something bold, something risky. He didn't know if it would work, but he was willing to try. When he got home, he took out his old notebook and started writing plans. He thought about the upcoming school charity gala where students performed to raise funds. If Clara could play there, maybe, just maybe, her father would see her strength. But there was one more dream in Miguel's heart. A small, fragile hope he didn't dare speak aloud. That one day Clara might not just play the piano, but sing. He knew it sounded impossible. She hadn't spoken in years. But deep inside, he believed her voice wasn't gone. It was just waiting for the right moment to return. As he closed his notebook that night, he whispered to himself, "Music can wake the heart, and maybe it can wake her voice too." The plan forming in his mind would soon change everything. For Clara, for her father, and for himself. The days following Miguel's meeting with Mr. Hayes were heavy and quiet. Miguel did his work as usual, but something inside him had changed. He felt a mix of sadness and determination. Every time he passed the music room, he slowed down, wanting to peek inside, but he didn't. He told himself it was better this way. He didn't want Clara to get into trouble because of him. Still, he couldn't stop thinking about her. The way she smiled when she played. The way her eyes softened when she listened to the sound of his humming. He missed that quiet connection they had built. The simple peace that filled the room when they made music together. One evening, while cleaning the auditorium after a rehearsal, he noticed a banner being hung up near the stage. It read, "Annual Charity Gala, Bringing Hearts Together Through Hope." He stopped and stared at it for a long time. He remembered what the principal had mentioned once, that every year the school held a gala to raise money for children in need. Students performed music, danced, or showcased their art. It was a big event. All the wealthy families attended, including Mr. Hayes himself. That night, Miguel couldn't sleep. The idea that had been quietly forming in his mind since his last talk with Clara grew stronger. What if she performed at the gala? What if she played the piano in front of everyone, her father, the teachers, the students? Maybe then, her father would see what music truly meant to her. Maybe he'd finally understand that this wasn't just a hobby. It was her voice. And deep inside, Miguel had an even bigger dream, though he hardly dared to believe it. What if she sang? He shook his head at the thought. It sounded impossible. She hadn't spoken in years, but something told him that her silence wasn't permanent. It was waiting for the right moment, the right song, the right reason to come back. The next morning, Miguel found Clara in the courtyard. She was sitting under a tree, drawing in her sketchbook. He hesitated for a moment, then walked over quietly. When she noticed him, her eyes widened a little in surprise. She hadn't seen him since her father's warning. He smiled gently and said, "Good morning." She looked at him for a long moment before taking out her notepad. She wrote, "Father said you can't talk to me." Miguel nodded slowly. "I know," he said softly, "but I think there's something important I need to tell you." She tilted her head slightly, curious. He sat down a few feet away, keeping his distance. "Do you know about the charity gala?" he asked. She nodded. "I think you should play there," he said. "Play something from your heart. Let them hear what you feel, even if you don't use words." Her eyes grew wide. She quickly wrote, "He will never allow it." "Maybe," Miguel said, smiling faintly, "but sometimes people don't realize how strong you are until you show them." She looked down at her sketchbook, unsure. Miguel hesitated, then leaned slightly forward. "Clara," he said softly, what if we do something together? You on the piano, me on the guitar. One song, just one. If your father sees you play, if he sees how alive you become when you make music, maybe he'll change his mind." She stared at him, then shook her head slowly. Her pencil trembled as she wrote, I can't sing." He read her words and looked at her kindly. "You don't have to." "Not yet," he said, "but I believe one day you will." Her eyes filled with tears. She looked away, biting her lip. Miguel felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to tell her that he believed in her, more than anyone else did, but he didn't want to push. "Just think about it," he said softly. "No pressure." That evening, as he was leaving the school, he saw a small note tucked into the strings of his guitar case. It was from Clara. The note said, "If I play, will you be there too?" Miguel smiled. He wrote back, "Always." A few days later, Miguel gathered his courage and went to see Mr. Hayes again. The man looked up from his desk when Miguel entered, clearly not happy to see him. "I thought I made myself clear," Mr. Hayes said coldly. "You did, sir," Miguel said, standing straight. "But I have one request," Mr. Hayes sighed. "Go on. Let Clara perform at the charity gala," Miguel said. "One song. That's all?" The man blinked in surprise. "Perform? She hasn't even spoken in 2 years. Do you think I'd let her embarrass herself in front of hundreds of people?" "She won't embarrass herself," Miguel said calmly. "She'll remind everyone what real courage looks like." Mr. Hayes frowned. "And what would you know about courage?" Miguel took a slow breath. "I know what it's like to lose someone you love and still have to wake up every morning and keep going. I know what it's like to carry pain quietly without anyone noticing. That's what she's doing, sir. But she's trying to heal, through music." For a moment, the office was silent. Mr. Hayes stared at him as if searching for a reason to say no. But something in Miguel's steady voice made him pause. Finally, he said, "And if she refuses?" "Then we don't force her," Miguel said simply. "But if she agrees, please let her try." Mr. Hayes leaned back in his chair. "Fine," he said after a long moment. "But if she performs, you'll be on stage with her. I want you to take full responsibility." Miguel nodded. "I will." When he told Clara the news, she couldn't believe it. She looked at him with wide eyes and wrote quickly. He said yes. Miguel nodded, smiling. He did. For the first time she laughed, a small soundless laugh that made her whole face light up. They began practicing every afternoon after classes. Miguel brought his guitar and Clara sat at the piano. They tried different songs, soft ones, slow ones, happy ones. Sometimes she'd get frustrated, making mistakes and shaking her head. But Miguel was patient. Don't think so much, he would say. Just feel. One day while practicing, she played a few new notes, not from any song they had rehearsed. It was something new, something she made up. Miguel listened carefully. The melody was gentle but filled with emotion. That's beautiful, he said softly. Did you write that? She nodded shyly and showed him a small notebook full of handwritten music sheets. It's called Light Inside, she wrote. Miguel smiled. Then that's the one we'll play. The days passed quickly. The gala drew closer and the entire school buzzed with excitement. Teachers decorated the auditorium, students rehearsed their parts, and parents donated gifts for the auction. But for Miguel and Clara, it wasn't just an event. It was something bigger. It was a chance, a bridge between two worlds. The night before the performance, Miguel stayed late at school checking the microphones and tuning his guitar. He was nervous. Not for himself, but for her. He wanted everything to be perfect. When he finally went home, he found his son waiting with 2 cups of tea. You're home late, Mateo said. Miguel smiled tiredly. Big day tomorrow, Mateo nodded. You've been smiling more lately, he said. Is it because of that girl at school? Miguel chuckled softly. Yes. She reminds me that even when life goes quiet, music can still speak. His son looked at him thoughtfully. You really think she'll sing? Miguel paused. I don't know, he said honestly, but I believe her heart wants to. That night, Miguel barely slept. He kept thinking about Clara, her quiet strength, her soft smile, her trembling hands on the piano keys. He hoped tomorrow would be the day her voice, her true voice, would return. The morning of the gala arrived. The school looked completely transformed. Lights decorated the hallways and the auditorium was filled with flowers and golden ribbons. Guests arrived in expensive suits and dresses, cameras flashing everywhere. Miguel stood backstage adjusting his old guitar. He felt out of place among the glittering crowd, but he didn't care. He wasn't there for them. When Clara arrived, she looked like a little star. She wore a white dress, simple but elegant. Her hair tied back neatly. She held her music notebook close to her chest. Miguel smiled at her. Are you ready? She hesitated, then nodded slowly. He placed a gentle hand over his heart. Remember, you're not just playing notes. You're telling your story. She nodded again, tears glimmering in her eyes. As the host called their names, the lights dimmed and the crowd grew quiet. The moment had come. The janitor and the mute girl were about to step into the spotlight together. Miguel took a deep breath, walked onto the stage and glanced at Clara. She sat by the piano, her small hands trembling slightly. He strummed the first chord, soft and steady. The sound echoed through the hall. Clara took a breath, placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. The melody was gentle and haunting, the song she had written herself, Light Inside. The notes flowed like water, filling every corner of the room, and as the final verse approached, Miguel glanced at her and saw something in her eyes change. She looked at the crowd, then at him. Her lips parted slightly. No one expected what happened next. The lights were warm on stage, shining softly over the grand piano, and the man beside it with the old guitar. The audience was silent, not sure what to expect from such an unlikely pair. A school janitor and the daughter of the richest man in the room. Miguel's fingers moved gently over the strings, his guitar singing a calm, tender melody. Clara sat still at the piano, her small hands resting above the keys. For a moment she didn't move. Then slowly she began to play. The sound that came out was soft but full of feeling. Every note seemed to tell a story, of loss, of hope, of something broken trying to mend itself. The room filled with music that seemed to touch everyone in different ways. Parents who had come expecting polished performances from their children now sat in silence, listening. Even those who didn't know the girl's story felt something heavy in their hearts. At the edge of the hall, Mr. Hayes sat with his arms crossed. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes never left his daughter. As the song continued, Miguel watched Clara closely. He could see her breathing change. Her eyes, once full of fear, softened. She wasn't looking at the crowd anymore. She was lost in the music. It was as if every note she played was reaching out to someone she missed deeply. Then came the bridge, the part of the song that had no piano notes written on her sheet. Miguel knew this was the moment she had left open, unsure what to do. It was supposed to be the part where she would sing. He strummed slower now, the sound echoing gently through the microphone. He looked at her and whispered just loud enough for her to hear. "It's your story, Clara, tell it." She froze for a second. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came. The crowd waited, sensing something important was about to happen. Then, like the softest wind, a sound slipped from her mouth. Fragile, trembling, almost a whisper. But it was there, a voice. Miguel's eyes filled with tears as he kept playing, careful not to break the moment. Her voice was shaky at first, uncertain, but as she continued, it grew stronger. She sang the words she had written in secret. Words about finding light again after losing everything, about hearing music in silence. The audience was motionless. No one dared to move. Mr. Hayes leaned forward, his lips parting in disbelief. He hadn't heard that voice in years, not since the night of the accident. For a second, his heart stopped. Then tears filled his eyes. Clara's voice carried through the hall, not perfect, but real, pure, honest, and full of emotion. It wasn't the voice of a trained singer. It was the voice of a child finding herself again after being lost for too long. When the song ended, there was complete silence. The kind of silence that comes right after something sacred. Then, slowly, one person began to clap. Another joined, and another. Within seconds, the entire hall was filled with thunderous applause. People stood up from their seats, clapping and cheering. Some even cried. Clara sat frozen, her chest rising and falling fast, her eyes wide in disbelief. Miguel placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and whispered, "You did it." She turned to him, and for the first time in 2 years, her lips formed real words. "Thank you." Miguel smiled through tears. "No, niña. Thank you." Backstage, everyone wanted to talk to them. Teachers, parents, even students crowded around, praising Clara for her bravery. Miguel tried to stay behind, not used to so much attention, but people noticed him too. The quiet janitor who helped a little girl find her voice. Mr. Hayes stood at the edge of the crowd, still stunned. His hands trembled slightly. When Clara saw him, she stopped smiling. She looked nervous again. He walked toward her slowly. For a long time, he didn't say a word. Then, to everyone's surprise, he knelt down and opened his arms. She hesitated only for a moment before running to him and hugging him tightly. The entire room watched as the powerful businessman held his daughter and whispered something into her hair. Tears ran down both their faces. It was a moment no one there would forget. Miguel turned away quietly, wiping his eyes. He didn't want to intrude. His heart was full, not of pride, but peace. Later that night, after everyone had left and the lights in the auditorium dimmed, Miguel stayed behind to clean up. The applause still echoed faintly in his mind. He couldn't believe what had just happened. As he swept the stage, he heard soft footsteps behind him. "Mr. Santos," a voice said. He turned around. It was Mr. Hayes. He looked different. Not the cold, proud man Miguel had faced in the office, but someone humbled and deeply moved. "I don't know how to thank you," Mr. Hayes said quietly. "I thought my daughter's voice was gone forever. And then tonight—" He paused, swallowing hard. "You gave her back to me." Miguel shook his head. "No, sir. I didn't give her anything. She just needed someone to listen." Mr. Hayes looked down, ashamed. "I didn't listen," he admitted. "I tried to fix her with money and doctors, but I never truly hurt her." "You did." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "Please take this. It's not enough, but—" Miguel raised a hand gently. "I don't need money, sir." The man blinked. "Then what can I give you?" Miguel hesitated, then smiled softly. "Let her keep playing. Let her keep her music." Mr. Hayes nodded slowly, his eyes wet again. "She will," he promised. "And I'll make sure others can too. You have my word." They shook hands, not as employer and worker, but as two fathers who understood loss and love in their own ways. When Mr. Hayes left, Miguel sat on the edge of the stage, staring at the empty chairs in the hall. He thought about his wife, about how she used to say music could heal anything. He finally believed it. The next morning, news of the performance spread through the school like wildfire. Students posted videos online. Parents shared the story. "The mute girl who sang again," the headlines read. But to Miguel, it wasn't about headlines. It was about one child finding her courage again. When he arrived at work, people who had never spoken to him before stopped to thank him. Teachers smiled, students waved, even the principal shook his hand. But he stayed humble, always replying the same way. "It wasn't me. It was her." Later that day, Clara found him in the hallway. She wasn't in her uniform. She was wearing a simple blue dress, carrying a small brown bag. She handed him a folded piece of paper. Inside was a hand-drawn picture of a guitar and a piano surrounded by stars. Underneath she had written, "Thank you for helping me find my voice." Miguel smiled. "You found it yourself," he said. She grinned shyly. "Can we still play sometimes?" He laughed softly. "Always." That evening, as Miguel rode his old bicycle home, the city lights sparkled like small stars on the road. He thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the hope, the music, the voice that had returned to life. When he reached home, his son was waiting at the door. "Dad, I saw the video," Mateo said excitedly. "You're everywhere online. They called you the janitor who made a miracle happen." Miguel laughed, shaking his head. "It wasn't a miracle, son. It was just love, and a little bit of music." His son smiled proudly. "Still sounds like a miracle to me." Miguel looked up at the night sky, the same stars that had watched over him every morning on his way to work. "Maybe it is," he said quietly. The next day when he arrived at the school, he noticed something new by the main entrance. A small plaque had been placed near the garden. It read, "Voice Within, a fund for music and hope," inspired by Clara Hayes and Miguel Santos, who reminded us that every soul has a song waiting to be heard. Miguel stood in front of it for a long time, his eyes glistening. He didn't need fame or recognition. This was more than enough. As he walked down the hallway, humming softly, he passed by the music room. The door was open. Inside, Clara sat at the piano, smiling when she saw him. "Ready to play?" she asked. He nodded, picking up his guitar, and once again, the quiet room filled with the sound of healing, not from fancy instruments or trained voices, but from two hearts that understood what it meant to lose and to find and to live again. The morning sun touched the windows of Crescent Heights Academy, spreading golden light through the halls. Everything seemed a little different since the night of the performance. Students smiled more. Teachers spoke softly about the event, like it was something magical that had changed the whole school. Miguel walked through the hallway with his cleaning cart as usual, but this time, everyone greeted him with respect. "Good morning, Mr. Santos," the teachers said kindly. Even the students who used to rush past without noticing him now smiled and waved. He always smiled back, humble as ever. Nothing about him had changed. He still wore the same old uniform, still carried his mop and broom, and still hummed his favorite tunes while he worked. But inside, something had shifted. There was peace in his heart. When he passed the music room, he paused, listening. A familiar sound drifted through the doorway. A piano melody, light and cheerful. Clara was playing again. She noticed him standing outside and waved him in. "You're early," she said with a grin. Miguel chuckled. "Old habits," he said. "The floors don't clean themselves." She laughed softly. "Can we play for a few minutes before you start?" He nodded and picked up the guitar that now stayed in the room, resting against the wall like it belonged there. As they played, their music blended so easily it felt like they had been doing it for years. When the last note faded, she looked up and asked quietly, "Do you ever miss performing for people?" Miguel thought for a moment. "Sometimes," he said, "but these days I think I've already played my most important song." She smiled. "The one we played together?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, that one. Because it wasn't just a song. It was a voice coming back to life." A few weeks passed. The Voice Within Fund officially launched. Mr. Hayes had kept his promise. The foundation would pay for free music lessons and instruments for children who couldn't afford them. Miguel had only asked that it be open to anyone who needed hope, not just students from wealthy families. The first class took place in the school auditorium. Miguel stood on the stage feeling nervous. He wasn't used to speaking in front of people, but today was special. In front of him sat a group of kids, some shy, some curious, some holding tiny instruments they'd never touched before. Clara sat in the front row, smiling up at him for encouragement. Miguel cleared his throat. "I don't have fancy words," he began softly.
"But I can tell you this, music can do things words cannot."
"It can heal, it can comfort, and sometimes it can help you say what you've been holding inside." The children listened closely. "I'm not a teacher," he said with a smile. "I'm just someone who knows what silence feels like. And I know how good it feels when you finally make a sound that belongs to you." The kids clapped shyly, and the first class began. From that day on, the auditorium was never quiet again. There was always laughter, the sound of wrong notes, and the joy of trying again. Miguel taught them the basics: rhythm, melody, emotion. He didn't follow a textbook. He taught them how to listen, how to feel the music in their hearts. Clara often helped him with the younger children. She had become confident again, her laughter filling the room. Seeing her happy gave Miguel the same peace as hearing a beautiful song. One afternoon, Mr. Hayes visited the class. He stood quietly at the back watching the children play. When the class ended, he approached Miguel. "I've been meaning to ask," he said. "Why didn't you ever want anything for yourself? A promotion, a raise, something?" Miguel smiled, setting his guitar down. "Because I already got what I wanted." The man frowned slightly. "And what was that?" "To see her smile again," Miguel said simply. "That was the whole plan?" Mr. Hayes stared at him for a moment, realizing something. "You mean this was your plan all along, to help Clara heal?" Miguel nodded. "Yes, sir. The day I saw her sitting alone by that piano, I saw something familiar in her eyes, the same emptiness I once carried. I thought if music could bring me back from that darkness, maybe it could do the same for her." Mr. Hayes's voice softened. "And it did." Miguel smiled faintly. "She did it herself. I just held the light until she was ready to see it again." The man's eyes filled with quiet gratitude. "You've given me more than I can ever repay," he said. Miguel shook his head. "Then don't repay me. Just keep this going. Let other kids find their voices too." Mr. Hayes nodded firmly. "You have my word." Months passed and the foundation grew. People from all over donated instruments and funds. The story of the janitor and the executive's daughter became known far beyond the school. Journalists called, magazines wrote about it, and even TV reporters came to do interviews. Miguel never liked the cameras. He always stepped aside and said, "This isn't my story, and when it's Clara's." But everyone knew his kindness was what made it all possible. One day, while tidying the hallway, Miguel found a letter in his locker. It had no name on the front, just a small drawing of a piano and guitar. Inside, in careful handwriting, were the words, "You changed more lives than you'll ever know." He didn't know who wrote it, but it made him smile. Years went by. Clara grew older, her music taking her to places she once only dreamed about. She played in concerts and spoke at events about how music brought her voice back. Every time she was asked how it all began, she always said the same thing. "It started with a janitor who believed I could sing." Miguel still worked at the school, though his duties had changed. He now ran the music outreach program full-time. The halls that were once silent now rang with melodies every afternoon. One rainy evening he stayed late, sorting through donated instruments in the storage room. The rain tapped gently on the roof and he smiled, thinking of how far things had come. He heard footsteps and turned to see Clara, now a teenager, standing in the doorway. "You're still here," she said with a grin. He chuckled. "Someone has to make sure these guitars don't get lonely." She laughed and walked in, holding a small envelope. "I came to give you this. It's an invitation." He took it carefully and opened it. Inside was a simple card. Grand City Auditorium, charity concert featuring Clara Hayes. Below that, in her handwriting, it said, "You have to come. You're the reason I'm here." Miguel felt his chest tighten with emotion. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," he said softly. The night of the concert arrived. The auditorium was huge. Bright lights, a full crowd, a grand stage. Miguel sat in the front row wearing his best clothes, though his hands still carried the roughness of years of work. When the music began, he was transported back to that small school stage years ago. But this time Clara stood tall, her voice stronger, fuller, shining with confidence. Between songs, she spoke to the crowd about how one person's kindness had changed her life. When she finished, she called out, "I want to invite someone very special on stage." Miguel looked around, surprised. Then he realized she was looking right at him. The audience turned, clapping as she gestured for him to come up. He walked slowly to the stage, embarrassed but smiling. When he reached her, she handed him a guitar, his old one. "I kept it safe," she said softly. "Now play with me one last time." The crowd went silent. Miguel hesitated for a moment, then strummed the strings. The same melody from that night years ago filled the hall. Clara began to sing, but this time she wasn't the shy girl searching for her voice. She was a young woman sharing it proudly with the world. When the song ended, the hall erupted with applause. People stood, clapping and cheering. Miguel looked at her, his eyes shining. "You did it," he whispered. She smiled through tears. "No," she said. "We did." After the show, reporters surrounded them again, but Miguel quietly slipped away. He preferred to watch from a distance, seeing her surrounded by people whose lives she would continue to inspire. As he stepped outside, the cool night air touched his face. He looked up at the stars and whispered, "Thank you," as if speaking to someone beyond the sky. Maybe to his late wife, or maybe just to the world for letting him witness such beauty again. The streetlights reflected off the wet pavement, and for a moment he could almost hear her voice in the wind. Music heals the heart before it heals the voice. He smiled, holding on to those words like a promise kept.